welcome to CFN Media. I'm John Veneri, editor of Catholic Family News. What do you think of when you recall the 2014 Extraordinary Synod in Rome? Do you have a sense of Peter confirming the brethren and giving strength to the faithful? When we consider what was allowed to happen, and with respect what Pope Francis allowed to happen at this October Synod, especially the serious proposal of a new pastoral practice that would allow divorced and remarried Catholics to receive communion, do you have the impression that Pope Francis understands the duties of the papacy in the same way that Pope St. Pius X understood these duties? Pope St. Pius X, in the opening of his encyclical Pascendi, here's what we read. Pius X says, "The primary obligation assigned by Christ to the papal office is that of guarding with the greatest vigilance the deposit of the faith delivered to the saints, rejecting the profane novelties of words and gainsay of knowledge, falsely so called." And he goes on to say that in the face of heresy, I'm quoting him again, quote, "We may no longer keep silence, lest we should seem to fail in our most sacred duty." Do you get the sense that Pope Francis and the modern synods do the opposite? Because that's what I see. In allowing the multitude of scandal and confusion that resulted from the Extraordinary Synod, we see that Francis and the Synod do not guard with greatest vigilance the deposit of the faith delivered to the saints. They do not reject profane novelties. On the contrary, they encourage them. I mean, proposing a new pastoral policy that allows those objectively in mortal sin, living a life divorced and remarried Catholics, a new pastoral policy that allows them access to the Eucharist in the name of compassion. If this is not a profane novelty, then words have lost all meaning. But I want to make an important point regarding the words of Pope St. Pius X. He says that if he fails to speak out against dangers to the faith, he will have failed in his primary duty. In other words, Pope St. Pius X is telling us that it is possible for a pope to fail in this regard. And this, in a nutshell, and I say this with respect, and I wish it was not the case, but it's what we see in front of us. This, in a nutshell, is what we see with Papa Bergoglio and his recent tumultuous synod. We see failure to guard with greatest vigilance the deposit of the faith as delivered to the saints. We see failure to reject profane novelties, and worse, Pope Francis gives every indication of supporting the radical proposal of Cardinal Kasper, where Kasper in February called for this new pastoral policy that would allow divorced and remarried Catholics to receive the Eucharist. The day after Kasper delivered that at the consistory, Pope Francis singled out Kasper for praise, saying, "This is what I see doing theology on your knees. Thank you. Thank you." He publicly praised this. So, what do we do? Well, of course, first we pray for the Pope, but we resist what we can only call his destructive program as emanating from the Synod. I mean, look what's happening. Look what's happening. Cardinal Burke, the former head of the Roman Rota, he is calling upon Catholics to stand up for marriage, to stand up for the Catholic teaching on marriage and the family and regarding divorce. Now, Cardinal Burke is doing this because he knows that we can't rely on the present-day Vatican to teach the truth in this regard. There's an organization called Voice of the Family. They're in Europe. Very good organization. And they're working, trying to ensure that the 2015 Synod on the family stays faithful to what the Church always taught, and that these novelties are not introduced. Okay? They're pleading with the Vatican, please teach the truth regarding marriage. Now, if Pope Francis understood his papal duty, we wouldn't need a lay organization. Well, we would need lay organizations, but we wouldn't need them doing this. We wouldn't need them pleading with the Vatican to please teach the truth regarding the Catholic faith. Now, we know that Pope Innocent III and the great Cardinal Torquemada, St. Robert Bellarmine, others, they tell us that we resist a pope who goes wayward regarding Catholic doctrine and morals. The fact that they're talking about what to do in a case like this tells us that yes, this type of thing is possible. And we've quoted these often in Catholic Family News. But I want to close by quoting a more recent quotation. Father Joseph de St. Marie was a capable Carmelite theologian working in Rome in the 1970s and 1980s. He was an expert on Fatima. He was a loyal son of Pope John Paul II, and he even helped John Paul II compose the 1982 consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the one that the Pope recited. But despite this, Father Joseph de St. Marie issues the following warning regarding the present state of the Church, and talking about those in the Church at the highest levels. Here's what he says, quote, "In our time, and it is one of the most obvious signs of the extraordinarily abnormal character of the current state of the Church, it is very often the case that the acts of the Holy See demand of us prudence and discernment." Close quote. So Father Joseph de St. Marie is telling us in a respectful, elevated, and gentlemanly manner that we have to be careful these days, that the Holy Church passes through an extraordinary period of history. He calls it abnormal. He's telling us all is not well. Yet in the face of this extraordinarily abnormal character of the current state of the Church, what does he say to do? He does not say, look, to keep your balance, just follow the Pope no matter what. Just obey and listen to and accept whatever he says. He doesn't say that. No, aligning himself with the popes and the saints of the past, those who I've mentioned, Torquemada, Innocent III, St. Robert Bellarmine, he tells us that we have to be cautious. We have to be careful. We have to exercise prudence and discernment when it comes to the actions of the Holy See itself. That is, when it comes to papal actions. And he even says it is very often the case that we have to do this. Ages and centuries of the Church, we didn't have to worry about this. We weren't, the Catholics were not faced with this problem. In our time, this is the problem that we confront. And St. Robert Bellarmine tells us in a case like this that it is licit to resist the Pope, first of all, by not doing his will, and secondly, by preventing his will from being executed. So, how do we keep our balance? Again, we keep our balance by clinging to what the Church always taught in the past. Catholic truth taught in the same meaning and in the same explanation as what the Church taught throughout the centuries. That is the formula given us dogmatically, infallibly by Vatican I, that Catholics are bound to hold to the Catholic faith in the same meaning and in the same explanation as what the Church taught throughout the centuries. We learn the Catholic faith from those magnificent Catholic books and manuals published prior to Vatican II, published before the superstition of aggiornamento took hold. And we pray that by some miracle, God will soon send us a Pope who understands the primary duty of the papacy, as did the great and holy Pope St. Pius X, the duty to guard with greatest vigilance the deposit of the faith. So we'll have a lot more to say on these topics, including, as I promised last time, a little explanation, teaching on Catholic truth regarding marriage, the primary and the secondary ends of marriage. There's a lot to say in future episodes. Please stick with us. Thank you for joining us. For Catholic Family News, I'm John Veneri. See you next time.